All right, shalom, everyone. And this is our we're picking up, and this is our third reading of the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And this is the NMP, the Biblical School of Global Liberation for All Oppressed Peoples. And today we're going to be picking up on page 49 of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And before we start, we will have a psalm read from our brother Bryant. And whenever you're ready, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm Brother Bryant. Greetings to everyone. Shalom. I'm going to be picking up and reading at Psalms chapter 12 out of the King James Version. It reads, "Help, Lord, for the godly man ceaseth, for the faithful fell from among the children of men. They speak vanity, everyone with his neighbor, with flattering lips and with a double heart do they speak. The Lord shall cut off all flattering lips, and the tongue that speaketh proud things, who have said, with our tongue will we prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? For the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now will I arise, saith the Lord. I will set him in safety from him that puffeth at him. The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Thou shalt keep them, O Lord. Thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. The wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted." That was Psalms 12. Psalms 12.
All right, thank you, brother. So right before we start, I would like to do a quick review of what we went over on last week's reading, and a couple of things that Freire discussed and what we started to understand is one, this term and ideal of prescription. And prescription is the imposition of choice. And the recipient of that prescription is forced to conform. And we can see this as the oppressor prescribes particular behaviors. The oppressed receives that prescription, they accept it, and they continue on with that behavior. And that behavior, be it thought, be it actions, it continues to keep the oppressor in his position, his or her position. Then Freire goes on to talk about freedom, in which we understand, and Freire defines freedom as the goal of liberation. Is the goal of liberation. That's the to attain freedom. And we know through this liberation process, the oppressed has to become more responsible. They have to be accountable and become autonomous. And he goes on to then talk about the situation of oppression and the fear of freedom. And from there, he talks about the duality of the oppressed and the goal of the pedagogy of the oppressed. And at this point, Freire is discussing this pedagogy must be used in concert with, not for the oppressed. So this whole understanding is that it's working with the oppressed and not for them. And it's a recognition and reflection on oppression and this struggle for liberation. So that from that point, it leads him on to page 48, where he talks about the central problem is how can the oppressed, as a divided, inauthentic being, participate in developing the pedagogy of their liberation, which is a great question. And he further discussed the oppressed. The oppressed is a host to their own oppression through the process of adhesion. And we know that the process of adhesion is to become more like the oppressor. And he's going to further get into that on page a little later in 49 and 50. We're going to kind of go over that again. And through this process of humanization, the oppressed must struggle to divorce oneself from this adhesion, not to become like the oppressor, but to become, as he stated earlier, this new man, a new woman. And he gives some insight. We went over that last time, and we paired that up with a couple of scriptures going into Genesis, also Isaiah, just to show what this new man, a new woman will look like and what they'll be doing. And the last part, just to review, is the oppressed becoming, recognizing the situation of oppression. So from that, we'll go ahead and start on page 49. And just like last week, I'll read a paragraph. I'll share my thoughts on it and open it up for anyone else to share their thoughts. And from there, we'll go paragraph, open up, and so on and so forth until we end at page 52 tonight. All right. So the first paragraph on page 49, it says, liberation is thus a childbirth and a painful one. The man or woman who emerges is a new person, viable only as the oppressed contradiction is superseded by the humanization of all people. Or to put it another way, the solution of this contradiction is born in the labor which brings into the world this new being, no longer oppressor, no longer oppressed, but human in the process of achieving freedom. So when I read this and I look at this, I see the process of humanization is the process becoming fully human and looking at each other as persons, as humans. Also, I see here where he says the liberation is thus a childbirth and a painful one. And when you really think about it, when I think about it, it really is, because you first have to liberate yourself. And when I think about, and I look at the world, and he used certain terms like adhesion and, prescription. I think about how certain behaviors that I have in me that's been, instilled by this system that we're currently in, this capitalist system, is an oppressive system. And I have to root up all those behaviors and thoughts that support this system. And that's a arduous process because you run into some mental conflicts there. But through it all, as you liberate yourself, you become this new man and new woman. And once you're this new man and new woman, you can see, as he says here, the man or woman who emerges is a new person, viable, meaning capable of working only as the oppressed contradiction is superseded. So this new person is coming out of this dialectical relationship of oppressor and oppressed. They're now becoming fully autonomous, responsible, accountable, and understanding the work at hand. And he goes on to say, it's superseded by the humanization of all people. Or to put it another way, the solution of this contradiction is born in labor, which brings into the world this new being. And again, it says no longer oppressor, no longer oppressed, but human in the process of achieving freedom. So that one there is a pretty much a simple and self-explanatory paragraph to me. And it's all about going through the hard process of liberating oneself and also others, and understanding as you become this new person, you're outside of this relationship of oppressor and oppressed. And I'd love to hear anybody else's thoughts, if anybody else would like to add anything to that.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Shalom, everybody. Isn't it, even though it's self-explanatory, isn't it amazing how, like, I don't know Friere's background as far as his belief system or any of that, but isn't it amazing how not just him, but many of these writers who are taken as secular writers are seem to cover the overall theme of the scriptures, in which the really educated man in the scriptures learns how to read them, and the overall theme becomes clear. Like when he says that, which brings into the world this new being, no longer oppressor, nor oppressed, but human in the process of achieving freedom. And this is basically and eerily similar to the things that Hamashiach taught about becoming this new man, this higher state of mind, and how you become more like in tune or one with the creator, and that you become this new person, this new being. And it's just, it's always baffling to me to see these writers and things that I never knew existed, but these writers who wrote in the past cover these things, and the rest of the world can't seem to see this. But I digress on that.
You know what's so interesting about that, I guess, where the next page he goes into that, and I came across these two words that he used together, which kind of brings it all together. Like last week when we was reading it, and we can see, like you just said, all of these different authors and different people, they can write about these certain themes and spiritual principles that dates back to early man, and it's very interesting. He used the word objectively verifiable, and it's just that simply means that different people examining the evidence will independently come to the same conclusion. He came to the same conclusion. We can read Marx came to the same conclusion. Any person that was working on a behalf of liberation came to the same conclusion. There is a certain force out here that's oppressing others, and this force has to be removed. Now, different people talk about it in different aspects. Where Marx went out there more system and capitalism. Freire is here is talking more so about the dialectical relationship, and he takes a lot of, you can see a lot of Marx in this. But Freire.
But look though. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
But look at how that is though. Anybody who attaches themselves to this form, whatever form of liberation, because everybody starts at different points and from different angles. Everybody is not opening the scripture and beginning to see liberation. They're doing it wherever they do it at. But isn't it funny how it all lines up the same way to these scriptures, which they may know nothing about, or the things that we're just coming into knowledge with?
Yeah,
and how it all basically is saying the same thing, whether they know it or not. That's amazing.
It is. That it's something higher, it's something greater.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get to. There's something higher. That's like if you tap into this, you're not going to be able to help but to come this way. That's crazy.
And that's what makes it so interesting for all of us that's on right now. We come in at a different position and angle, which allows for us to see things in a more holistic way. And that's just from what I see and believe. And the reason I say that is because here we are rereading the Pedagogy of the Press. This book came out 50 some years ago, 54 some years ago, I think 1968. Here we are in 2022. We're using this book and also our scripture, our text, and we're bringing these two things together to show that what the Bible state. We have somebody else that's supporting this. Although he was raised Catholic, he has some type of understanding to even to digest this reality and to write it in word form. And here we are reading it today. It's our job to take this book, take our holy scriptures, and condense them to explain it to people nowadays. And I feel like we are backed by a different type of strength. We're not just relying on our soul strength. We have something else that's there motivating us and moving us forward. And that's just my perception of it. I could be wrong, but that's how I feel about it.
I don't think you're wrong, bro. I don't think you're wrong. I know we taking up time here, but I'm trying to digest what we're reading and what we're seeing. So it may take a little time, because if I feel something, I'm gonna say it, because I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand this fully as we go. And so I like what you said again right there when you said we have a different angle that we're looking at it from. But see, our angle in the way that we looking at it, it's like it's identifying markers that are spoken that we're automatically magnetized and drawn to. We know when somebody is saying something that's on the page that we're at, even though they might not say it the way that we'll say it or identify it the way that we identify it. But it's those little markers and the things like that first paragraph right there. There were markers there that made my antennas go up. And I'm like, whoa, that's different. But I yield.
I got you. Thank you for that. Well, it's open for anybody else that want to say anything before I move on to the next paragraph.
Yeah, I have some.
Yeah, I would like to comment. Is it brother R? Is this your brother RJ?
Yes, it is. Shalom,
okay,
sis.
So I want to. I was kind of sitting here listening to what you were reading, and what came to me was kind of almost like a rebirth. It's when I'm thinking about like being born again, like this rebirth, because like it says, with the liberation, thus a childbirth and a painful one, the man or woman who emerges is a new person. And that I was even looking at that word viable, because viable, like you said, also it means capable of working, but it also means able to survive. And then I was kind of thinking about how I think Freire talked about it earlier, how sometimes, in this process of liberation or this process of becoming human and aspiring to this freedom, sometimes because of how we have been shaped to exist in our mind and in our consciousness, we will kind of revert back to this way of the oppressor and kind of become oppressors ourselves, or at least kind of sort of have that mentality. And so this whole way of being new literally has got to replace. Like it's this whole process, this whole life process of becoming new, of replacing this contradiction where both of these things exist inside of us, but somehow there's this replacing of something that is taking place where we become this whole new man or this whole new woman. And the thing that I thought about was really kind of like a butterfly, like because they go through this whole process, this more metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly, and those two things are not the same in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings. A caterpillar has like a lot of legs. Butterfly only comes out to have 6 legs, so they're completely different creatures. It comes out of this whole process, but it's completely different from the thing that it came out of. And so when I think about that, this whole process that we go through, I kind of think about that transformative process, that this is really something brand new that we actually become, and in becoming brand new, we actually create a brand new world. So I don't know, it's just something that kind of came to me as I thought about it. And even what is so important as we go through the process is always remembering it is so easy for us to revert back to how we've been shaped to exist. And we always have to kind of fight against that so that we can come into the fullness of our humanity, and kind of escape this thing that always is wanting to pull us back into this way that we've been shaped to exist.
Man, thank you for that, Sister Tanya. Yes, I agree all the way. And when you, like you said, becoming new, and I like the analogy you use with the butterfly and the caterpillar, because when you look at it here, he says liberation is thus a childbirth and a painful one. Like you say, we can kind of revert back to that. But when we remove this dialectical understanding of oppressor and oppressed, if we don't have anything, there's a void. And we know how it is changing behaviors. If you don't change your triggers and replace it with something else, you're going to go back to what you know. And that's what Freire was speaking about, that adhesion, and also that the prescription. This, you got to think, it's already instilled in us with these certain behaviors. We have to work through it. But our scripture and text tell us that we have to renew our mind, right? We have to kill that old man. And through this whole thing with the caterpillar and the butterfly, the one thing that comes to mind when you say that is a paradigm shift, because this is what's happening. We are in a certain state, be it oppressed or oppressor, because Freire talks about both of them liberating themselves, but in this case, the oppressed. You have been living your life a certain way for so long. Now you have came across something that has sparked in your mind that you need to change. And you're going to consistently work at it until one day you have a paradigm shift and you are fully stable in this new position. Like a butterfly that can't return to a caterpillar, but that caterpillar has to find its place. It has to find somewhere to hang and create its cocoon, and it has to be safe in that cocoon. And once it's out, it's out. It can never go back. And that's how this paradigm shift in my eyes is happening. It's you consistently working at it until you really got that grasp of it. And once you had that grasp of it, you're not going back. Because we coming at this from a different perspective. We're becoming a new man, what the Bible speak of. We're coming more like the Messiah. So we leaving all those behaviors behind. But man, that's a great point. That was a great point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and just to end that, I really love how you brought out, they find somewhere to hang and they go into this cocoon, but it's the conditions that are created that actually allow this metamorphosis to begin to take place. So that's kind of what I thought of when you said like how they find this space and they go into a cocoon and we can't really see what's taking place, but there's these conditions that are actually set for this process to take place. So I thought of that. That's just really powerful. So anyway.
Yeah, that is. And I think Brother DJ, you were going to say something too, sir.
Sorry. Yeah, it was. Sorry. Shalom. So what I took from that when I was reading it was like kind of revealing Revelations 12, kind of letting you know who the woman was and how it was like a woman clothed with the sun, moon under her feet. She was in travail to give birth. And when she gave birth, she gave birth to a man child who was caught up. And the way I interpret that was always, it's just reiterating the birth of Christ or whatever, or the Christ getting caught to the sky. But in actuality, the woman is actually a nation or a group of people or an idea of liberation. And the man child is what the group of people that are born from that struggle for liberation, which is very, very, very thought-provoking.
And when that man child was born, who was upset though?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the dragon was getting ready, want to eat the man child. So
right,
that just lets you know what's going on.
And that man, if we wanted to, if you allow me to elaborate on that, it's just what comes to my mind. That man child is born, the dragon's upset, and we know it's not a literal dragon. All right, we're not dealing in that type of mindset. We understand in the practical terms of what that dragon manifests itself as in reality. All right. So these particular people, if you will, our systems, or this particular force is afraid of this truth that's coming out. And we say terms like the truth hurt, right? But the question is, who does the truth hurt? Because if we're accepting and open to the knowledges and the truth of God, because we know that all truth comes from the Most High. Anything outside of truth, we know that's the father of lies, and we know who that's from, and we know that's sin. But the question then becomes, who does truth hurt? because the people that's seeking liberation accepts truth, because they on that path of changing. This book tied and paired with scripture, man, is so deep and powerful that, when we're able to reach the masses and really get them to start thinking about, like how Freire is going to come in a few paragraphs, maybe 2-3 paragraphs down, he talks about really understanding the system that we end up, the oppressed getting the understanding that they're being oppressed. Once that happens, the oppressor has no identity outside of the oppressed, because if the oppressed removes themselves from it, you have no oppressor. But the oppressor doesn't want that. So he's going to try to fight to keep the oppressed in their position. But that truth, though, is what's going to liberate the oppressed from their position. And those oppressors who also want to be liberated will accept that truth. And the truth is a powerful thing. But I just use that to piggyback off what you said, man. Thank you for sharing that as well. All right. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to say something too. He mentioned Revelation 12, and you all familiar where John is drawing the parallel from, of the woman bringing forth a man child?
Would that be in John? No, John. I'm sorry. He said it. I think that's in John, right?
No, John, the Revelator, is actually drawing the parallel from Isaiah chapter 66.
Okay.
And in Isaiah 66, he talks about Jerusalem bringing forth a nation. And she says, shall a nation bring forth a child at once? When she travailed, she brought forth a man child. And she talked about how Isaiah talked about how the man child was nourished by Jerusalem on her lap and stuff like that. He's drawing it from Isaiah 66. And Isaiah 66 is speaking of the travail. Revelation chapter 12 is speaking of the travail. And what he's saying, liberation is thus a childbirth and a painful one.
Mm-hmm.
Because you probably run into this sooner or later if you haven't run into it already. When you begin to explain to people about the liberation struggle, I have run into it quite often. Then people come to the conclusion, hey, if people try to do that, they'll kill them. And that's enough reasons for people to abort the mission. I don't want no part, in so many words, they don't say that I don't want no part of it, but that's their conclusion. Like, hey, if you try to do that, then, but that's what the teacher said. Some that may happen to, some it may not happen to, but others, if you're a body, like Stephen being killed, the Messiah himself being executed. Matthew 23 says, I'm going to send you prophets and wise men. Some of them you shall scourge and slay in your synagogue. So he's explaining, when we look at the liberation struggle, you look at the Panthers, gunned down, killed, their friends, their companions, their comrades, killed and imprisoned. That's what I mean, like praying for courage and taking full advantages of the time of peace. We may sustain peace, but the master already let us know this isn't strange. It comes whatever part of the job he sent you to. And that's something that a hurdle that even those who we speak to have to understand, the sacrifices that human beings have made to lead us to this day, and they have been painful sacrifices. And that's that part of liberation. And that's why some people don't move forward to liberation, because that is the fear. And I've heard Sister Sue and others talk about it. But yeah, I just brought that out. I think that was an excellent reference, especially that Revelation 12 and the parallel to Isaiah 66. So it's to encourage people to go still. We have to encourage one another to go through, no matter what the cost. I'll yield.
Thank you. All right. So we'll move on to the next paragraph here. And it says, this solution cannot be achieved in idealistic terms. In order for the oppressed to be able to wage the struggle for their liberation, they must perceive the reality of oppression not as a closed world from which there is no exit, but as a limiting situation which they can transform. This perception is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for liberation. It must become the motivating force for liberating action. Nor does the discovery by the oppressed that they exist in dialectical relationship to the oppressor and as his antithesis, I'm sorry, y'all, that without them, the oppressor could not exist, in itself constitute liberation. The oppressed can overcome the contradiction in which they are caught only when this perception enlists them in the struggle to free themselves. And like he says here at the top, this solution cannot be achieved in idealistic terms. So we can't have this unrealistic aiming for this type of perfection. It has to be realistic. It has to be practical. We have to add this part of praxis in it, this reflection and action. We just can't sit back and think of it and dream of it and not act on it. It has to be practical. And he says, in order for the oppressed to able to wage the struggle for the liberation, they must perceive. And we understand perceive is the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through our senses. So they have to perceive this reality, perceive that they can change this world. And I have this analogy. When I read this, I thought of it like this. You have people in a cave, a dark cave, and then you can't see your hand in front of you, but it's a couple of people can see a light at the end of the tunnel. And out of the couple of people that can see the light at the end of the tunnel, you have a few that start moving towards that light at the end of the tunnel. The light or the exit is that motivating factor. They see it. So they use that to energize themselves to do this liberating action, to move forward towards this light. Now they might stump their toe because it's dark. They might fall over and bruise themselves. They might get halfway and start doubting themselves, but they continue to move forward until they get to the end of this cave, and now they're outside of it. And that's how I kind of see this paragraph where he's talking about like he said, this perception is necessary, but not a sufficient condition for liberation. Just seeing the end of that cave, seeing the light is not sufficient enough. You actually got to get up and move. And he says it must become the motivating force for liberating action. That moving towards it is this liberating action, and this determinism to not give up. And he says, nor does discovery by the oppressor that they exist in dialectical relationship to the oppressor, and oppressor as his antithesis. So they, again, they see themselves as they understand the situation that they're in. They're moving towards liberation, which in turn, if you don't have anybody to oppress, you can't have an oppressor, So that's what I take from it. And I would love to hear others' thoughts on it.
Yes, really quick. I just wanted to focus on that last part of the sentence where it says this stuck to me a couple of days ago as well, when it said the oppressed can overcome the contradiction in which they are caught only when this perception enlists them in the struggle to free themselves. And when I thought about that is, basically what I'm gathering from is that when we see that our participation in the capitalist mode of production is which solidifies or allow the oppressor to have his rule and reign, that's when we perceive that, that's when we can start to figure out ways on how to stop it. But I know it goes on further, and we read it already. I was messed up with that word subjectivism and all that. You was helping me. But when we get out of ourselves and stop looking at ourselves as just individualistic, and when we start to see everything, as a whole, and how everybody is being oppressed, and even how the oppressor doesn't realize his actions in certain instances or cases, when we start to see that all of us have contributed to this reality that we're living in, then it becomes a different situation and we can liberate ourselves. But when we just look at leaders or any, like he said in the beginning of the paragraph, idealistic, any imaginative stuff, any other external forces, when we look forward to those things to deliver us, then it won't happen because it's impractical. So we have to figure out practical ways. And we have to, the first thing is to think analytically. And when we think analytically, we can practically come to a conclusion, okay, that this situation or this social order that we're in, it must be uprooted. We must overthrow it. And how does that happen? When we stop participating in it, when all of our thoughts and everything that we do, it goes into a communistic way of thinking, a communistic practice, everything that we involved in. And it basically sums up the commandment of love thy neighbor as you love thyself. Once we see that, exploitation must be crushed. We can't exploit one another or oppress. But I just wanted to give those my 2 cents on it. But I yield.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Thank you. And the floor is still open if anybody else would like to add to that.
When you say we, what's the first, who are we referring to when we say we? Like, we must critically think, we must recognize this or recognize that.
As far as the we, I would talk about those of I'm referring to those of us who are going through the re-education process, who are starting to perceive, like Mr. Freire was saying, those that perceive it. So the individuals that are aware of what's going on, the individuals that are aware of the oppression, I would regard them as the we, just to be clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true. I'm bringing this part out because what happens accustomedly throughout just different organizations and people in our experiences, or should I say my experiences. Sometimes, probably subconsciously, we definitely get involved, which I'm saying this as a reminder, not necessarily for what you're saying per se, because it's said constantly from myself and others, but we want to bring clarity, because sometimes we can subconsciously put ourselves in these places and not necessarily think of this awareness, for example, that must take place with the oppressed. He says, the solution cannot be achieved in idealistic terms. In order for the oppressed to be able to wage struggle for their liberation, they must perceive the reality of oppression. And then, so while we're reading this and thinking about it, I'm not saying you're not, but it's something that we want to meditate on, is how will the oppressed perceive this? So what I'm saying is, now, let's say we are in the position that the awareness is coming. It's being revealed to us. So our next task is, how do we have the oppressed perceive it? Excluding ourselves in that moment of thought and thinking of the others who don't know at this moment in time. And I say that because what can happen accustomedly is we tend to let time pass day by day without being intentional to go out to the oppressed. And so just it happens just so subtly, before you know it, times have, weeks have passed, and we haven't, or people's haven't, months, years pass, and still this thing of getting ready to go out. No, this is the awareness. We're becoming aware. So now we have to look at the next action, or the praxis is gathering human resource, discipling people, That was the actions of the Messiah after he made his disciples aware. Their praxis was, their action with their knowledge was to make disciples. And I would say this is the threshold we're at. And that's why he told the disciples, look at the fields. They're ready. So I'll yield with that. And again, it's just as a reminder, something to keep on our mind. So we were, be proactive. I'll yield.
And thank you. That is something that we need to keep at the forefront of our mind. And like you said, to meditate on it, because it's better to start now rather than later, right? Okay, I'll move on to the next paragraph here. It's the bottom of page 49, and it says here, the same is true with with respect to the individual oppressor as a person. Discovering himself to be an oppressor may cause considerable anguish, but it does not necessarily lead to solidarity with the oppressed. Rationalizing his guilt through paternalistic treatment of the oppressed, all the while holding them fast in a position of dependence, will not do. Solidarity requires that one enter into the situation of those with whom one is solidary. It is a radical posture. If what characterized the oppressed is their subordination to the consciousness of the master, as Hegel affirms, true solidarity with the oppressed means fighting at their side to transform the objective reality which has made them these beings for another. So, right, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there before we move on to the next page here, and just make a few comments. And again, if anybody else would like to share, that'd be great. And I mean, I like this portion here because what comes to my mind just as a biblical example is you have an individual oppressor. I think of the young rich ruler and Matthew 19, 16 through 24. And that's just the overall story of it, between the conversation between the young rich ruler and the Messiah. And the reason I bring that point up, because he says that solidarity requires that one enter into the situation of those with whom one is solidary. And the young rich ruler was all good up until a point. He came, he said he kept the commandments, but when it required him to give away all his riches, he stopped and walked away because he was sad and disappointed. He didn't want to really be fully on the side of those with the Messiah. So he really didn't choose true solidarity. And it kind of put me back into this thing of false generosity. Like he says here in the second and third sentence, he says, discovering himself to be an oppressor may cause considerable anguish, but it does not necessarily lead to solidarity with the oppressed. Rationalizing his guilt through paternalistic treatment of the oppressed, all the while holding them fast in a position of dependence. And we know that from false generosity, they'll help out up to a point, long as it doesn't require them to dismantle their position, power, and authority over the oppressed. And I just find that very interesting. And the last part, he says, it's a radical posture. And when you really think about it, you take an oppressor who gives away all of their things to humble themselves, to be side by side with the oppressed class, and to start to understand the system that they played a part of to create these situations. You can pick any type of situation, and they are now becoming subject to what they have created. It is a radical posture. That's like taking nowadays, think about Trump giving away his stuff and coming down here with us to try to help liberate others. It's a radical thing. It kind of, stun you a little bit. These people that have all this wealth, they will call them kings nowadays, kings and queens with all this power and money and wealth. But for them to give all that up, to come down, to really stand side by side with the quote unquote oppressed to help liberate, I mean, that is a radical posture. And and that's just this paragraph, all his work so far, I just enjoy it. But this here, it really just, it can really blow your mind when you think about certain people that we think are so far gone that turn around and to help. So and it's open for anybody that want to say anything, and I yield.
Yes, no, I just wanted to bring out the scriptures, not bring out the scriptures literally, but like the example of King Cyrus and Darius, where they helped the children of Israel, go back from out of their exile and read the temple. And I was hearing an argument how they were saying that Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu was saying how Donald Trump is like Cyrus because he established, well, not established, but he looked or viewed Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and stuff like that. But we see, it's funny because Elder Judah asked that question about when we say the we, but I'm gonna try to tie all this together real quick. But the reason why Darius regarded Daniel, we all know, of course, is because Daniel was thrown in the lion's den and he found himself to be unscathed. And that kind of moved Darius to see, okay, man, their God is the true and living God. And I think not to piggyback, but to correspond what I'm saying to what Elder Judah asked me is that as far as the way, how do we convince the oppressor? It's the same thing with Daniel, but a little different. I think that it comes in with, our works today. So if the oppressors, like the kings of the earth now, see that no matter what, like Elder was saying earlier about the first paragraph, when it says that people are, this liberation is a painful thing. Even though we see that a lot of us will be martyred and murdered and thrown in jail, we're going to still keep going. That's not going to deter us. So those kind of things like that, those kind of actions or those kind of practices will turn the king's heart to say, man, these people ain't giving up. These people are really going forward with this mission. They're ready to stand. And I think that that's kind of like the same dynamic I kind of get from Darius. He sees that Daniel is, no matter what comes his way, Daniel is going to have the Lord to depend on. And Daniel, being that he has faith in his God, and not just faith in his God, but being that Daniel was unscathed in the lion's den, it kind of showed that to me, as far as what I'm getting at it, that Darius saw that his God was the true and living God, that it was no way around it. So I think that if the kings of the earth today, or the rich men, if they see that no matter what's going on, even if some of us are becoming martyrs, we're still going to go forward with the message. Like how the apostles, they was beaten and they came back outside and preached some more. I think that when we have that intentiveness, when we have that courage to keep going, no matter what the case might be, the kings of the earth will say, you know what, man, now this is just me, wishful thinking, but the kings of the earth, their heart may be moved to say, you know what, they got the people organized, people believe in them, you know what I mean? Their God is truly God. It's time for us to give up our power. That's how I was viewing that. But as far as that radical posture, I just looked at that with Daniel and King Cyrus. They allowed the children of Israel to come and make their state and rebuild the temple. And the reason why I brought that up is because we understand that from learning from the classes that Israel was called and chosen to bring justice and liberation to the world. So by King Darius, and King Cyrus, them being these great kings, and well, not great kings per se, but them being these rulers of the earth, with allowing Israel to go and build their temple, what that ultimately does in the long run, it destroys Babylon, because we know Israel is going to establish justice. At least that's their job. We know that didn't happen, but that's their job. So I think that about us going out and we, preaching, and about us demonstrating, it's the same thing. Maybe I got it a little bit convoluted there, my explanation, but in other words, today's time, in the face of the king or in the face of the rulers, we can stand regardless of the oppression, regardless of the pushback from them. They locking us up and them killing us. We'll still stand, and maybe that just maybe that'd be enough to move the king's heart or move the ruler's heart to say, look, man, our stay is gone. The people believe in them. The people, you know what I mean? They following it. It's over for us. But, God willing, that's the way things go. But I yield.
Okay, thank you, brother. All right.
Hey,
Go
Shalom.
ahead.
Hey, real quick, I want to chime in on something.
Mhm.
The part when Freer was talking about, the oppressor as well, that he has to also come into his humanity. I was watching this documentary some time ago. It was about quants. No, I'm not really gonna get into quants because it's complicated, but let's just put it this way. The stock market, a lot of the stock market, the guys that's on the floor doing the trading and bidding with them, doing the trading and bidding for a lot of the investors. What are they called again? On the stock market, the guys on the floor.
On the brokers, traders,
stock brokers, the traders. Yeah, the traders. Okay. So, anyways, they depend on that ticker. The information concerning the stocks as it goes along, the big ticker. But what's interesting about that is that's totally in subjection to these computer guys, these guys that are really good with algorithms. I mean, that stuff isn't just happen serendipitously, or it's not happen organically by reason of people interacting. This stuff is one or two guys really happen to computate these things. And a situation happened in 2010 that, you have to really search for this, but they mentioned in this documentary, the economy was shut down, like the entire global stock market. I don't know if it was the entire global stock market, don't quote me on that one, but I know the American portion of the stock market, I think it shut down for like 10 minutes. Nobody knew about it. All because one quant, he made an error. And so I say that to say this. There was a guy, he was an investment capitalist, and he was saying that once he became aware of that, then that was his light bulb. That's when he said, and he's quoted on film saying, that's when I knew something was wrong about capitalism. But sometimes it takes that. It'll take an event that happened. Even sometimes you get people that may see it on their own, where, nobody necessarily didn't like bring him the message, but because he understands this system, how it works with finance and the stocks and so on and so forth, and think that it's in their mind, it's a fair deal where, everybody's participating. But no, it's all a subjection to these computer guys. They're called quants. And when he saw that, he knew it was a problem then with capitalism. And so sometimes, and there's a lot of people who know that there's something wrong with capitalism. They either don't understand that there's an alternative because every other social ideology, whether it's socialism or communism, is not, by definition of what it is. We all understand that. So they don't have no other alternative to source. One of the things that I've learned that's interesting, that would be in all of our interests, sometimes when you're scouring through news, and you're watching hours and hours of news and you digging for information, just keep your eyes open, because sometimes it's not the most obvious that people will expose themselves, but it'd be the little things, the little discrepancies that they will have are opportunities to build on. Because there's a lot of them out there. No matter how much people love, like one can love capitalism, there's always going to be something within the system that he's going to say, this ain't particularly right. And maybe in his mind, you feel, okay, there's a solution for it. It could be fixed. But it's those inadequacies that, once we hear of them, especially if it's coming through their mouths or if they make mention of it, perfect time to capitalize on it. Even just the information. Sometimes, like, again, I didn't know much about quants. I was looking for something else. But that information let me know that, look, this thing is so set up to fail that, because, again, all it takes is one quant or one person to do something totally off whack. Or you see the movies where you get the one guy who's a tech genius, but he wants to shut down the whole world for some ransom money. But stuff like that actually can happen if the wrong person is in the wrong place. Now, I'm not trying to make a conspiracy theory here. What I'm saying, I have to say that those are the type of situations that people will see when they knee deep into those type of things. And those are the type of things you bring out for exploitation. I just think this is a good tactic to always find the exploits within the thing that they're knee deep into. Because one thing we do know, we know capitalism is evil according to what we understand from the scriptures. but getting to know the ins and out of capitalism, how it works, even the language, the modern day language. And you know, a lot of the words that they use, they may seem hard, but believe it or not, they just complicated words for the most simplest things in the world. Once you're able to understand what it means, that's why I tell people bookmark Investopedia. So when you hear these words, when you're watching business news and so on and so forth, you can look these things up. And a lot of times you'll find out, knowing the right words, knowing the right language, you'll be able to, man, better understand exactly where people may be coming from. A lot of time, we may hear it. You may have a news flash and they may say certain words or phrases, letting you know, yeah, I see a flaw in the system, but it'll go over our head because we don't particularly know the language. So I yield on that point.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting because it brought to my mind. So no matter what industry you're in, within that industry, if I'm understanding correctly, you can find that discrepancy there. And one thing that always gets me is planned obsolescence. You know, with engineers, they build these things to fail. I know I will hope that the engineers that's doing this planned obsolescence, that they have some more, you know, some conflict there, because you're building something that's bound to fail. And because if they was to build something that was going to last forever or last for extreme amount of time, capitalism will fall because it's not able to reap, you know, those returns on it like that. But that is interesting about the quant thing there. Thank you. So I will go ahead and start, you know, finishing up that paragraph, and it's moving on to page 50, and it says, the oppressor is solidary with the oppressed only when he stops regarding the oppressed as an abstract category and sees them as persons who have been unjustly dealt with, deprived of their voice, cheated in the sale of their labor. When he stopped making pious, sentimental, and individualistic gestures and risk an act of love. True solidarity is found only in the plenitude of this act of love. It is an extensionality in its praxis. To affirm that men and women are persons and as persons should be free, and yet to do nothing tangible to make this affirmation a reality is a farce. And I just go back to think about the false generosity there. That's how that sums up in my mind, the false generosity. You know, they're not really there to try to help. If anything, in this manner, they could be there to try to infiltrate, to throw people off course. So, all right. I just hold here for a moment if anybody wanted to point anything out. Okay. All right. So the next paragraph says, since it is a concrete situation that the oppressor oppressed contradiction is established, the resolution of this contradiction must be objectively verified. Hence, the radical requirement, both for the individual who discover himself or herself to be an oppressor and for the oppressed, that the concrete situation which begets oppression must be transformed. And again, with that objectively verifiable, and that just simply means that different people examining the evidence will independently come to the same conclusion. Applying that to what he's saying, the oppressor and oppressed are coming to the same conclusion. Hey, this relationship that we're in needs to be transformed. This material world that's supporting this system also needs to transform. But we understand that before that can take place, it has to start within the person. They have to liberate themselves first internally, then they can move forward in this process of liberating each other and everyone else, which is an interesting thing, you think about the oppressor liberating himself or herself, because it's totally different from the oppressed. But the oppressor is struggling to liberate. They're on this path of humanization. I'm curious, what do you guys think about how it looks for the oppressor to liberate himself? Because he or she wouldn't be dealing with the same type of mental conflicts. Like oppressed, in my mind, they're really not going to be without their necessary needs. They're going to have plenty of it. So it's interesting to think about how they will approach this humanization process. Like he says, they have to humble themselves basically and be with solidarity with the oppressed. But before that, getting to that point, in my mind, it's just interesting to think about how would they go from point 0 to point 1 to wanting to be in solidarity with the oppressed.
I think two examples you find is Zacchaeus and Cornelius.
Zacchaeus. Oh yeah, right.
And Cornelius. That's how it would look. And yeah, that is their liberation process. It's to liberate themselves from the role of dominator or exploiter. And so
Cornelius, where I might be wrong, but that's New Testament, right?
yes, that's the soldier who Peter was sent to.
Okay, that's Acts then. I think that's where it's at, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Him being a soldier, head of the Roman legions, they were also pretty much exploiters and dominators, and he didn't do that. But he had the power. That's what the legion would do. That's why John was telling the soldiers, don't, be content with your pay. Don't, because that's what the Roman, historically speaking, that's what the Roman soldiers was doing. That's what soldiers do in general. They go into the land and they make their little portions. Yeah. So I guess on the other side of that is to carry with us, how do we convince them to do that? That's not necessarily an answer to be given tonight, but these are the things we meditate on in our own minds as we constantly try ourselves and meditate on arguments to go to combat. How do we get these petty bourgeois peoples? That was Lenin's task. He said, we got hundreds and thousands of petty bourgeois people who haven't been sold over to the cause. They've been duped by the ruling class. So how do we get them to authentically and sincerely join? And that is a task for us. Mm-hmm. The conversation's got to be on point. Our arguments must be thorough. If Paul, they don't say names, but Paul did the same thing. Without him doing what he was doing, his work fed, I don't know how many people in Jerusalem during the famine, because it was a couple of accounts of the aristocrats who joined on to what he was saying. So he had to have a thoroughly convincing argument for Greeks, philosophers at that height of civilization, educated people. These were the educated people who probably attended the universities, frequented Mars Hill, if you will, philosophers, and how did he reach them? And that is something to think about, where, like he's saying, we can't be idealistic. Paul had to be more than idealistic to reach a bunch of educated aristocrats. So those are, I would say a couple of examples where we see they making a transition to be in solidarity with the oppressed.
That just the word how, you're just thinking like in what manner and like how, by what means it is. It is. That's something really to consider. Because I know a lot of brothers and sisters that's quote unquote call them itself Israel. They just it's deaf to everybody, but it requires more than just trying to damn everybody. But
And I would say this, I will encourage people to do this because I've probably from the beginnings of the Communist Manifesto classes, I would make reference to Marxist.org. I don't know how many people went on this page. I don't know how many people downloaded articles and started reading articles. But you will hear me say, well, this is because you have one aspect of people who's condemning. But then I would encourage people, again, get this article. And I was talking to Conrad Bryan about it. Lenin's discourse on the task of the Communist Youth League. And he's going to explain how to be a communist is going to take more than just reading pamphlets and knowing communist phrases. He's arguing you have to know about society, everything would have led to it, all the contributions in which men had brought to society. And one example is Karl Marx. He wrote 6 volumes of Capital. He didn't discuss communism hardly at all, if at all, in 6 volumes. But he was able to look at the world and scientifically assess how the laws of society, how capitalism works. And you see from that knowledge of past revolutions of the Paris Commune, the revolutions of the capitalists overcoming feudalism, he was able, through the grace of God, to write work that is popular at over 100 years, and have grabbed the minds of hundreds of thousands of workers. So, this is the importance of read their work, because we just can't say capitalism evil. You're not going to convince nobody saying it. So we have to understand and be able to, like Paul said, be all things to all people. How can you go to a professor or law officer, bringing the conversations down to the human worker and dialogue to the point where you can get this officer to contribute like Cornelius, or you can get this attorney or whoever else, or aristocrat to contribute like Zacchaeus. Okay, so there's, we can't be idealistic. You know what I mean? So we could think of Trump like, oh, wow, what if? Hey, I mean, he's all in the ballpark. Everybody like him. Meaning that's our playing ground. So, they're not out of reach. We have to, that's why I say the importance, study past revolutions, study and take opportunity to read up on it. Because what we have learned for the most of our lives in bourgeois or capitalist education is not sufficient. You know what I'm saying? It's not sufficient to convince these people. You have to learn more. You know what I mean? And as revolutionists, if that's what we're called to be. I'll yield.
Well, I want to ask Brother Judah. So you're saying so in terms of, let's say, reaching, somebody in the ruling class or people in the ruling class, are you saying in studying, say, Lenin, for example, and being able to explain what we believe in such a way where they kind of see their part in it, their part in not in, in the degradation of humanity or in the dehumanization of the oppressed, like their place, their part in that? Is that helping to bring them to that realization?
Yes, that's definitely a part in bringing them to that realization. Showing their part in it and showing, again, why we're showing their part in it, showing whether it's criminal,
Right.
whether that's true, because some of them don't even think about it.
Right.
Literally just won't even know. So absolutely. And so therefore, we have to have an extensive knowledge,
right,
to even bring it to their attention. Yes, yes.
No.
I yield.
Okay, and leave it open for a few more seconds here if anybody else want to add to that. All right, moving on to the next paragraph here on page 50, and it says, to present this radical demand for the objective transformation of reality to combat subjectivist immobility, which would divert the recognition of oppression into patient waiting for oppression to disappear by itself, is not to dismiss the role of subjectivity in the struggle to change structures. On the contrary, one cannot conceive of objectivity without subjectivity. Neither can exist without the other, nor can they be dichotomized. The separation of objectivity from subjectivity, the denial of the latter when analyzing reality or acting upon it, is objectivism. On the other hand, the denial of objectivity in analysis or action, resulting in subjectivism, which leads to solipsistic positions, denies action itself by denying objective reality. Neither objectivism nor subjectivism nor some psychologism is propounded here, but rather subjectivity and objectivity in constant dialectical relationship. So this, it took me some time just to wrestle with this here to get an understanding. And I mean, we can take it line by line because he does the using certain words, objectivism, subjectivism, and so on and so forth, and can kind of throw you off a little bit, or at least it did me when I first read it. So he says here, to present this radical demand for object transformation of reality. And again, we're trying to transform the objective world, this material world around us and things around. We're trying to transform that. We got to combat the subjectivism, the subjectivist immobility. And these are the people that's just solely concerned with themselves, and it's everything is a matter of perception. This brings forth this solipsistic position. There's just an inward person. And he says, which would divert the recognition of oppression into patient waiting for oppression to disappear by itself. When I read that, I think of people that, the Messiah is going to come and change the world for me. I really ain't got to do nothing but wait until it change. And he's arguing that we got to combat this type of mindset, or this type of person, to let them know that the world changes when you change and you act on that change, becoming that new man, a new woman. And it says, it's not to dismiss the role of subjectivity in the struggle to change structures. Again, which you can't dismiss it, because becoming this new man, a new woman, changing your inner dialogue, working on the thing between your ears. When we start to get applying this to our biblical understanding, this spiritual understanding, we start to download these spiritual principles, if you will. Our words and our thoughts are going to change, and with that, our actions are going to change. And so far, our mind and our words and actions change, the environment around us is going to change. You can't be light, can't be light is going to remove darkness away from it. It's going to change that darkness to light, if you will. He says, on the contrary, one cannot conceive of objectivity without subjectivity. You definitely need both. Neither can exist without the other, nor can they be dichotomized. And in this system here, capitalism, you can see how everything is split, dichotomized. They want to box it off. So in this sense, he's saying that you cannot dichotomize objectivity and subjectivity. They're together. It's like a coin. They're stuck together. But leave it as it is. Nowadays, they try to separate it. You either one or the other. You either an objectivist, where you have more emphasis on the objective world, or you're a subjectivist and you have more emphasis on your inner world, and you lean to either or. You lean to one of those sides. He says that the separation of objectivity from subjectivity, the denial of the latter when analyzing reality or acting upon it, is objectivism. So this notion of objectivity requires subjectivity. The denial of subjective reality leads to objectivism. And this denial of objective reality leads to solipsism. And we know this solipsism, we talked about it before, is this idea that it's a very self-centered, it's a selfish way and a selfish being, if you will. And that's my understanding of it. And to finish it off here, is this objective reality occurs in a dialectical relationship between subjective and objective reality. Like, you need both. This is where praxis come in. It resides in this dialectical thinking that melds the two together. You have reflection, then you have your action. So you can think of your reflection happening in your subjective world, and your action happening to the objective world. And it's this praxis where Freire is like combining both of them. And he's saying you need both of them. You can't separate them. You have to have your subjective world, your internal world, reflect on the things, then you go out and act, then you take that information, you kind of create this cycle, so and yeah, so that's so far what I'm taking out of that paragraph. If anybody else want to add to it, that'd be awesome, because this is a mouthful here. Okay, and so the next paragraph here says, to deny the importance of subjectivity in the process of transforming the world and history is naive and simplistic. It is to admit the impossible, a world without people. This objectivistic position is as ingenuous as that of subjectivism, which postulates people without a world. World and human beings do not exist apart from each other. They exist in constant interaction, right? So it's no vacuum. A person acts on the external world changes, and which in turn changes that person that act upon it, or others. He goes on to say, Marx does not espouse such a dichotomy, nor does any other critical, realistic thinker. What Marx criticized and scientifically destroys was not subjectivity, but subjectivism and psychologism. Just as objective social reality exists not by chance, but as the product of human action, so it is not transformed by chance. If humankind produce social reality, which in the inversion of the praxis turns back upon them and conditions them, then transforming the reality is a historical task, a task for humanity. And what I take for that is if it is true that our social reality is produced by human ingenuity, we can call this like this social construction, right? Then the transformation of this reality is our historical task. So it's like a historical obligatedness. If we created hell on earth, we are obligated then to create heaven on earth. And this praxis of struggle is only possible through the awareness of oppression. So we have to become aware of this oppression. Then once we become aware of this oppression, it is our historical task, our historical obligatedness, if you will, to transform this hell on earth to heaven on earth. And I'll pause there if anybody want to add to that. Okay. And moving on to the next paragraph here, it says, reality which becomes oppressive results in the contradistinction of men as oppressors and oppressed. The latter, whose task it is to struggle for their liberation together with those who show true solidarity, must acquire a critical awareness of oppression through the praxis of this struggle. One of the gravest obstacles to achievement of liberation is the oppressive reality absorbs those within it and thereby acts to submerge human beings' consciousness. Functionally, oppression is domesticating. To no longer be prey to its force, one must emerge from it and turn upon it. This can be done only by means of the praxis, reflection, and the action upon the world in order to transform it. And here is this Freire is talking about this oppressive reality. Reality does not. So he says this reality which becomes oppressive results in a contradistinction of men and oppressors and oppressed. So in this first few sentences here, he talks about the oppressed have to gain this critical awareness, and they have to spearhead this this struggle for liberation. And the oppressor, for those who want to show true solidarity, must also acquire this critical awareness. That shows there that not every oppressor is going to want to have true solidarity with us. And he goes on to talk about this grave obstacle. And I think of that in terms as so you have your average worker, which is this 9-to-5 worker, right? And you have those who say, man, I want to liberate myself from this 9-to-5 and I become an entrepreneur. So they leave one section of the system and operate in another section, yet they still within the system. They're not transforming anything. Whereas if we become this new man and woman, we're not trying to liberate ourselves from a 9-to-5 and become an entrepreneur. We're actually stepping outside of her or outside of the system, if you will. And we're saying that this whole labor system and financial system has to be done away with. And that requires to gain that critical awareness, because if you have just a little bit of awareness, you'll think you need to move from 9-to-5 to entrepreneur, but that's not enough to change this objective reality. So in the last part here, he talks about how it can submerge human beings' consciousness. And I think of like say you have an example of wild dogs, right? And these wild dogs, they're out there in this area. They know how to forage and live on their own. But if I wanted to domesticate a dog, This oppression is a domesticating, and you look at it in our terms. I'll take this dog, bring him into my home, and I'll make him dependent on me for his food. So this dog loses his ability to live on his own, which brings in this dialectical relationship of oppressor and oppressed. The wild dog now has become oppressed. He's no longer wild, he's a domesticated dog. And this came to my mind earlier when I was at the park when I was pushing my son and I saw these people that was throwing bread out to the geese and the ducks out there, and the sign said, "Do not feed, the ducks this bread and stuff." For a couple of reasons. One, it can, it can get sick and kill them. The other, it gets them dependent on coming to this spot looking to get food, and that messes up their natural state. And you can look at that as look at how we are in that same position. A lot of us rely on the grocery stores more than our own ability to grow our own food, and we have become domesticated. And again, it's like another word I think of is civilization. When they want to civilize somebody, they domesticate a person because they say this is the way that we act. Now these people over here who's outside of our prescriptions of behaviors and how society should work, they're acting wild, they're different. So let us go over here and civilize them, domesticate them so they can assimilate into our standards. And within that, we lose our not we, but these people, they lose their sense of autonomy, they lose their sense of their personal history. It's a lot of things that go into it. And I just think that's a great paragraph, and we can see how this system can kind of erode the consciousness of a human being, because they're operating in this process of dehumanization when they feel they need to domesticate, or this oppressive system when it's domesticating or civilizing somebody, they're in the process of dehumanizing you, removing your identity to instill their prescribed manners and things so you can operate in a way that they can remain in their position. And that just goes back to what Freire has been talking about. And once you're domesticated, your reality gets skewed. Now you think the only way to liberate yourself is to become more like the oppressor. That goes into adhesion. So you can see how he just, in his one paragraph, he just brings a lot of his prior, concepts into it. So I'll pause there if anybody else want to add to it.
I don't want to add nothing. I just want to say that those were some good analogies that you just used right there. I could see exactly what you were saying by using those. So awesome job, brother.
Thank you.
I want to be an advocate on that. A devil's advocate, if for lack of better words, is that you definitely, when you're presenting that, you want to be well-rounded in the sense of describing this argument of domesticating, because actually, if we're not describing it along with the context of the mode of the oppressor and explaining that, well, the enemy will flip it and say, well, that's exactly what Israel did to the Canaanites. They try to domesticate them, put them in a mode. That's what they say about the Bible and the God you believe. So they say, well, you're trying to make people conform to your belief. And to some people, that is oppression. So when you explain, it's the same idea with war. And how we, when you have people say, well, the Israelites killed people and this and that. Again, you have this general idea of things. So it's important to get into the intricate to show the detail, because that's the only way sometimes you're going to identify the differences, is to go into the detail. That's one I wanted to explain. And the other thing that I would like to bring out is something that I've noticed as well, which is also difficult to struggle against with people. Especially, I won't say especially religious people, but I have run into religious people. Sometimes the teachings will come out and people will respond, we can't do that. Yahweh Shai, that's only gonna happen when Christ come back. And just to understand the psychology of that, and from my own experiences, where you think that to accomplish this task is just like trying to go to Mars. And it's almost because the reality is so out of tune with real reality. It's like, something supernatural. Christ's gonna have to come back from the sky to do it. And they're actually saying the same thing that he's saying here on page 50, to present this radical demand for the objective transformation of reality, to combat subjectivist immobility. And that's what we have. We have subjectivist immobility, or we may call them idealistic, because they're waiting for something, or to flee, or in their sense, they have this either, like a young man was talking to me today about his brother talking about the chariots are going to come and save them from World War III and all this other stuff. But this is what you have, the subjectivist immobility, which would divert the recognition of oppression into patient waiting for oppression to disappear of itself. So this diversion of the recognition of oppression is what we run into as well, where people don't want to look into this. They don't want to understand it. And so they divert from it. God gonna deal with it. God will take it away. We can't do nothing about it. Until Yahweh Shai come, or to Jesus come. It's one heck of a thing to struggle against. But then that's when this is a part of the combat. This is a part of our action going into verbal combat. And then going into 51, it's the same thing he's saying. That what Marx criticized scientifically, he destroyed not subjectivity. We understand about subjectivity, but subjectivism. So it's this like almost like a mode of doctrine that people don't want to deal with the concrete reality or the material world. It's something, for lack of better words, otherworldly must happen first in their imaginations, what they identify as otherworldly. And he said, just as objective social reality exists, not by chance, but as the product of human action, so it is not transformed by chance. And so he just keep bringing this point, and it's something that we struggle. I know I've seen, it's heavy, it is really heavy on this subjectivism and the non-activity, or the, what do you say, immobility. And it's one heck of a struggle of getting out of, to wrestle people out of this mentality. But I'll yield with that, because it's prevalent in so many different ways.
It is, and I think it's just that the clarity. And to go to your first point, I could definitely see an oppressor trying to, or someone who identifies as such, saying, hey, that's the same thing Israel did to so-and-so. But for them to, for them to make that statement, the question then would have to come, at least for me, well, do you have time to really investigate that claim? Because when you look at something shallow on the surface, it may seem the same. But as you dig into it, like you say, get into the detail, the concrete reality of it, it's totally different, because Israel is not waging war to oppress people, but to liberate people. And the question becomes, who are you liberating from? Because you got certain people that want to keep you in that way. But I'll end it like at the root of it all, in my mind at least, is that Israel is to help usher things back to how it was back in Genesis. Again, I always go to the Lord didn't give man dominion over man. So we're trying to liberate man where you are your own full autonomous being. And long as you keep the laws and you don't harm anybody, you have no man to rule over you. I have no right to rule over you. I'm no God. You have no right to rule over me. You know, God. You have no right to take my life because you didn't give my life, But in this system that we're in now, it has to have an oppressor and an oppressed. And that conversation can really be had and go into depth. That's if they really want to have that conversation. Because that'll be an interesting conversation and one that'll lead them to either have some type of conflict in their mind where they don't want to agree, or they'll have to see, because
Yeah,
it's
I guess what I'm saying is not necessarily it definitely have to be an in-depth conversation, but I'm also talking about our presentation. Is that our presentation have to hint towards it?
I see.
If we saying right off the bat, people could they might not even say it out loud. It may just be on their own mind.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we definitely have to be well-rounded in the presentation, because again, like what you just explained, capitalism in one sense, it have made itself known in different aspects, whether you think it's prosperity or whether you think it's oppression. But the other end is what isn't clear, and that is the alternative society. So if we say, okay, bring men back to how it was in Adam, well, what's that? So we have to be more, we have to explain that system more. You see, and sometimes explaining that system more is to get more into the intricacies of capitalism, or the evils of it, if you will, to analyze the antithesis. And guess what? If we don't have realities to compare it to, then it becomes idealistic to just even a listener. And what I mean by that is a elder I was speaking to today about it. And I will have to reiterate, I will have to follow up, because once you can get them to the conclusion that, yeah, this is wrong, but the other thing is that you're saying that'll never be. But then my reply was, it was before, but he didn't know, because he didn't know history. And so once we get into history, then, oh, okay, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's where, again, when we're going into, like what Lenin is arguing, to be well-rounded, because we can say these things about Genesis and the Bible and oppression. Well, you got to, it's a legitimate argument. The Canaanite could say that was their land. They can say that. And in fact, that was the argument of the Jew against the Jews during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. They said that this nation have been troublesome to kings. They had removed people, as far as they concerned, off their ancestral lands. There was no Israelite when Canaanites inhabited that land. They came later. So as far as they're concerned, this is our land. So you have to definitely, that's a part of our task. Again, to explain that, whether in, longer conversations, but even prep, to even let a person know, yeah, man, no, there's more to this story. But we have to be equipped to provide that information, or else, it still becomes idealistic. How it was in Genesis. Well, how was that?
Yeah, you're right. That's excellent. Thank you for the elder, because that's motivating on my part to fine tune my words and, my language for that. I just kind of just bring me back to what Friere was saying in the prior paragraph. If humankind produce social reality, then transform that reality is our historical task. And if you don't have no sense of history, it all plays in part. Like they said, you got to know where you've been to know where you're going. Thank you for that. That's an excellent point made. I gained a lot from that.
Real quick, I wanted to say something. Elder was listening. Cause brother RJ, man, you helped me a lot earlier, man. I know I'm sometimes, man, you gotta like use a jackhammer to get stuff through my head. It's concrete up there, man. Give me for that.
Man.
But whatchamacallit? No, I'm starting to understand from what Elder Drew was saying. And I was reading something while y'all was speaking. So basically, like, could we be safe in saying that subjectivists are almost like superstitious, where objectivists are almost scientific? Objectivists deal with facts and practicality, whereas subjectivists, they kind of deal with like mysticism, like the religious type people, because they're very biased. They don't even know the facts. They'll say, well, God gonna come out the sky, and then I'll respond, well, show me in the Old Testament where God ever came out the sky. And they couldn't do it, but they believe that today's gonna come out the sky. But we look in the Old Testament, just looking at the facts, we see that every time that God appeared, God, he acted on behalf of the nature, the material world, and then he showed or revealed himself. So, like, will we be safe in saying that subjectivists are like superstitious and objectivists are more like scientific, where they deal with the facts? I'm asking a question.
Could be up to a point. I agree. Up to a point, yes.
Yeah, I will say, I think probably what edifies off, someone read the definition of it.
Yeah, I can. Let me see if I can share here. All right, let me know if you can see this here. So this is subjectivism, a theory that limits knowledge to subjective experience. So that's excluding objective experience. A theory that stresses the subjective elements in experience. And it goes on to the second definition, a doctrine that the supreme good is the realization of a subjective experience or feeling, such as pleasure. A doctrine that individual feeling or apprehension is the ultimate criteria of the good and the right.
Yeah, I can't recall whether it was the Epicureans or the Stoics. It was one of those schools of thoughts from the branches of Socrates. They came from the schools of Socrates. I can't recall whether it was the Stoics or the Epicureans that had this doctrine of this feeling. It was all about your feeling and what you felt to be right was right. And
right?
that lead into superstition, but again, you eliminate all facts. I mean, you can eliminate facts that way. The theory that limits knowledge to subjective experience. Well, that doesn't necessarily bring you the truth. So yeah, that you can find, I would say, a byproduct of that. You can find a lot of superstitious people may be that way. Yeah. That's a dangerous psychology.
And to be stuck on one side and not the other. Let's see here. That's interesting though, because Freire is saying that you have to combine both. You can't have one without the other. And I see it as where you have the oppressed are more subjectivist, because they look at the objective world as if they cannot change it. It's just, this is the way it is. I get up Monday, I go to work, and I do that because that's just how life goes, and they never try to change anything. Whereas the oppressor, though, operates, in my mind, as a subjectivist and an objectivist, because the oppressor, I will argue, says, I feel this certain way. And I want my external world to reflect that. So I need, if I want to have a private plane, I need to go, convert labor energy into money to purchase this private plane. So I'm gonna go and, oppress certain people to get what I need to get this plane. So that's how the oppressor feel they can change the object reality. That's the only way in my mind they can have oppressed people. They see a group of people and they say, I can change that. I can have those people work for me and I'll pay them whatever. And I'll take the extra and I'll go create what I want over here. I want to buy an island. I want to have a private plane. I want to have all this money. I want to be popular, a celebrity, So I just see like this, the oppressed are stuck in this subjectivist mindset where they feel they can't change it. And in my mind, that has to be true, because if it wasn't true, it wouldn't be no need for Freire saying that the oppressed needs to understand that they're being oppressed and that they can transform the reality. So that's how I look at it. I mean, I may be wrong or right, but that's how I digest it.
Yeah, I think that is I will agree with the assessment. I also will argue that you do have some oppressors who are subjectivists, because from their own what they think is right and true, without any ignoring the objective realities. They see the objective realities of oppression and starvation, but they can be subjectivist by simply saying this is the will of God. This is how God wants it.
True that. Yeah.
God made them that way, So yeah, I see on that end as well how their subjectivity is just realized from a different position.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. All right. Well, if I leave it open for a couple more seconds here, it's one last paragraph here, then that'll be it for the reading tonight. If anybody else has anything else they would like to add to it, the floor is open.
So I was just going to ask, so when we talk about subjectivity, because it seems like both of those things can play in for what is good or for what is bad. Like if the subjectivity is more like self-contained in the sense of, somebody has their own reality. I mean, clearly that's a bad thing, especially if it's not founded upon, it doesn't have like any basis in reason or anything like that, or any kind of scientific evidence or anything like that. But I guess in kind of understanding the difference between the two, could you say that the subjectivity is more kind of how we perceive what our inner world is, or how we understand truth, based on what we know truth to be, and then the objectivity is kind of how that plays out, this physical manifestation of what is subjective?
Yeah, I could see it, because it's your inner world, right? Your
Right.
inner world, your thoughts fuel your words and your actions. So
Okay.
it's like a loop almost. And
Right.
it goes back to that, like the new man. When we start to become this new person and we understanding the will of the Most High, what from our spiritual understanding, and we start to become this new person, our objective reality has no choice but to change, because we are changing,
Right.
So I agree with you. Yeah.
But so you could still say that's subjective, but it's subjective based on something else, not just subjective based on our own personal experience. So it doesn't play out negative in that way, because it's based on it has a different foundation.
Right. That's, and what Freire said earlier, like he was saying that, you cannot dichotomize the two, where you have some people who will separate them,
Right.
but it takes both. And
Right.
when, like you say, I agree. It's just a different internal world, if you will.
Right.
Yep. So
I'm not clear about. So I'm trying to understand. People separate them, right? People separate them. I'm trying to gather. Are you all saying that we know that there is an objective reality? No
Right.
matter what we do, we have an objective reality.
Mhm.
But because people separate them, they don't recognize that objective reality.
Mhm.
Even though
Right.
it exists, they don't recognize it.
Mhm.
So to them, they are subjectivists because they're not connecting the objective reality to the
Right.
subjective.
Right. That's what create that
Oh,
solipsism.
can I say this? Can I cut in? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was at work. I was just listening. Okay, yeah, Elder Judah, that's exactly correct in what the sister was saying. Because if we look at when you separate objectivity from subjectivity, it it creates I think in other words like a harsh situation on the people. It becomes an extreme. Okay, this thing is like with subjectivity and subjectivism. It's like looking at it from dealing with individuality, like the sister was saying, my personal experiences and different things like that. Individuality versus individualism. Like if when Elder Judah was mentioning about the Epicureans and pleasure, and it's about the individual and what's first, with the individual. That sounds like America big time, with individual rights and, so libertarianism, so to speak. But yeah, that's all I want to say. The subjectivism is leaning toward individualism, and subjectivity is permitted because of the individual recognizing themselves in a collective as an individual. That would be individuality. And yeah, that's I yield.
And they will ignore the objective realities, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
That's what I got.
yes, sir. And that's when
I'm just trying to gather.
that's when it goes off in.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir. That's when it goes off into the extreme when they ignore the other side, and so you begin to develop this individualism, like you said. Some oppressors are subjectivists, in the light of the doctrine of subjectivism, and so that's why capitalists are the perfect example. Because listen to them when they talk. I want to become this. I this, and I built that, and my plans for me. It's never a thing about we. Look at our Constitution, even versus the Constitution of Venezuela. If you go to Article 96, when it talks about in Venezuela about the people. Having full right of the land, and any resources coming out of the land belongs to who? The people. Like my sister said, yeah, that's right. We are the earth because we're made from the earth. You can find particles, things that are in the earth, you can find in our blood system, and so on and so forth. So it's they taught the extreme, and like Brother Brian was saying, with objectivism, one that holds to the physical world and there's no ability to change. That is exactly true. Because perfect example, my old boss, the job I just left, David Darden, he has a degree in political science and psychology. He'll tell you, I believe in communism, but I'm a faithless Marxist, like I was telling Elder Judah about him. He said, we can't get past this putrid lizard brain, so how can we accomplish this? And so, and then he goes off into just science, strictly science, as far as like, I want to say, if I'm correct, mundane way, I mean, not because I don't want to give the impression like science is not permitted. Even in the situation of philosophy, I believe God has a philosophy. If you look up the definition of philosophy, which and mankind has a philosophy, which is to lean to their own understanding without leaning to what God has put into place to govern man, and therefore we would not even, like Brother RJ was saying about the in Paulo Freire's book with the situation of oppressor. If they have no one to oppress, then they couldn't oppress. Well, that goes back to like Elder Judah was teaching here recently about the responsibility of the individual, the situation of the state, and you know, in Torah class when he kind of alluded to or gave me the impression that our responsibility as an individual to do well to ourselves and to do what is righteous, and therefore we wouldn't even need a state, you know, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm just trying to hurry up and mumble this in because I got to get back into the plant, but I yield.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, so I actually, yeah, that was great. So what I guess what I was actually trying to well, explain or try to figure out when it comes to the subjectivity versus objectivity, especially like with what you would say, Brother Judah, because it was probably a little bit different than what I was thinking, and I wasn't sure if I was thinking about it in the right way. So when you say they ignore the objective reality, do you mean in the sense of what the reality is in terms of what man made it, or what the Most High intends it to be?
Both, but in this particular, it could be either or. But in this particular case, if we use oppression as an example, that object, what man have made.
Right.
And,
okay. So I guess that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of subjectivity, because it seems like our distorted subjectivity or our inner world, it's manifested in the conditions that we see, I guess. And I guess that's what I was trying to, the connection I was trying to make between subjectivity and objectivity.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
and I guess
how
what
we can have the way we understand the world to be is the world that we create, or that we at least maintain.
Right.
Somehow.
But the phenomenon appears to be is that we don't recognize it.
Okay.
We don't recognize that where we are today and this false reality is what we made. And it's not something that God just had to happen, or no, we did it. And we don't recognize it. We don't recognize our objective world. We don't recognize what we have caused to happen.
Right.
And that's I think what I was just trying to get clarity of is that what was being said. So we definitely have objective realities, but we don't put them together because of subjectivity.
Right.
Or the subjectivities. He don't see that. Listen, this is a direct consequence of what we've done. Even though in our mind we think this is good and we come up with our own versions of what's right and what's wrong, what makes us feel good and how God would do this and how God would do that. We totally ignore that all of our actions, it causes this concrete or objective world to form one way or the other. But in our mind, it has nothing much to do with us, or it just deals with us in part. It is the will of God.
Right.
God have done it, or fate, stuff like that.
Right. And I think that's really what's so powerful about the whole idea, because what it does is, I think even in explaining it like on a personal level, and then when you're explaining to somebody else, I think we can see when we even talk about the idea of sin, or how we can talk about that sin like as though it is kind of this something that affects us but is kind of disconnected from us. But we can actually kind of see how mankind by his actions literally created the conditions that are. And mankind by his actions, of course he has to be transformed, can reverse those same actions. And to really, I guess, bring it down to something that's really practical and see our place in it, it really does give the opportunity for us to grow, and then for other people to be transformed and hopefully join in the struggle. Right.
And it gets going to, it was a conversation I was having today. I'll just say this before I yield. And I've heard it, and this is another thing you will hear. Why did God allow this? why did God do this? The guy, elder I was talking to today, he said, I'm up there, I'm 70, almost 70 some years old. When I get to talk to the creator, I'm gonna ask him why.
Right.
Why and I said, well, why did you do this? He was asking, why did you do this? And I let him know in the conversation. I say, well, he's going to say he didn't. You did. You did it. And that's what I just hear so much with people. Well, if there's a God, he's a loving God, why did he let this happen? No, man has done it. And that's
Right.
making that connection of how we have formed our objective world. So if we can create hell, that's the argument.
Right.
Create hell, then who told us we can't do
Can't
the
create.
opposite like you
Right.
just described?
Right. And then how capitalism is at the center of all these things that we see. How it has caused these things that we see.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess I'm just kind of asking those questions because for me to be able to bring it down to a way that I can own it myself and understand it where I can get it inside of myself, but then also be able to explain it to people in a just this like just having conversation and just in a way that's easily understandable. So that is part of why I was kind of trying to make those connections, ask those questions, because that does help to kind of bring all that together and for people to be able to see how these things interplay and work with each other to create the conditions that we now experience as human beings.
Absolutely. But that's what the book is teaching. That's dialogue. So exactly what's happening is exactly what he's teaching. Right. That's what we want. We want dialogue because that's exactly what is supposed to happen.
Right.
We learn how to convey the messages. So yeah, that is absolutely necessary. If we was doing this thing, it's just nothing but silence, it'd be fruitless.
Right.
So yeah. So I think that's very important. But again, it's just amazing to me. That's why I don't want to beat the dead horse, but the human being participation is just amazing, where we just simply don't know. It's just in so many aspects. I just talked to the elder again. He talked about the state and how the state does this and does that. So the state, in a sense, has this objective reality. It does. But at the same time, when we talk about the state, I had to ask him, well, who is the state?
Right.
And once we see the objective reality of the state, they're nothing but workers, people. Right. But we have separated ourselves from that. We don't see that. We make the state, whether we involved or not involved, who we talk to, who we vote in, who we don't, we make it all.
Right.
Yeah. And other than that, well, it's just the way God had it. That's just the way it got to be. Man, that frustrates me.
Right.
But isn't that? Oh, I'm sorry. Isn't that though? Like, how can we know? Like, born into a system from the cradle, and giving these directives, these ways. This is how you operate. This is how you do that, and that's why the need for search and a great awakening is mandatory. It's very important because you don't know. You can't know until you look. Like, no one is born with any of this information. And so I'm just asking, just to make sure that not to look, from my perspective, to look at these individuals like they just dumb and just blind, and they want to be that way. They just don't have the option, I'm thinking, as far as the thought process, to view another way. That's my thinking, though. Tell me if I'm wrong, though. I yield.
Yeah, I would say that that's the way it may appears, but then that would be unfair. They have the option, but they have to search. And that's what makes the difference. Every man have the option and just unless you just impaired. But every man, he just don't choose. That's why it's just repeated, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be open. So those of us who don't know, it's not that we may be ignorant of it. So we're not necessarily saying they're dumb. They could be quite intelligent people. But we're ignorant of it because in essence, we choose to be. Because we decided to search for other things opposed to search for truth or to search for liberation. So yeah, we're able to, and it's just a choice that we have made.
All right, I got you. Yeah, there is an option. Like we know that there's an option, but it's up to each individual to seek that out.
Yep.
Yeah. Like right now, like even up to this point, I never thought I would be here discussing these things, especially with the basis supposedly be in the Bible. I never in a million years would imagine that I would be here this day talking or even just sitting back listening and considering what all the comrades are bringing out. And then that's years ago that I just wouldn't have pictured that. I just wouldn't have pictured that, but it slowly progressed into this off of this seeking, off of this search. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's crazy.
None of us. I didn't know. Man, believe me. But when you on a journey for truth, you have to buckle up.
And one last thing that another thing that's remarkable about it is that when you get it and start to understand, it makes so much sense. And so you seek for more of it because it is making sense to you and where you're seeing this thing heading. And so it's making so much sense to you. And like we said earlier, and even as the scriptures say, after we've tasted this, how can you go back? There's no plan B after this. Once you accept this information that you're seeking for, there's no going back. There's no plan B. Ain't no matter what you try to do, you can't go back. You can't unthink this.
You could try, like I think you and I were talking about, you can try and suffer torment.
Right, yeah.
I remember El used to say, once you come to a knowledge or you're being called, your greatest contradiction will be within you. You can't even run from it. So you got to do all you can to smother it out. And when you doing that, you pretty much killing the conscience. Yep, you're killing the conscience.
I think another thing was interesting when y'all was talking about the subjectivism and Sister Tanya, you all was just speaking recently. I thought about what RJ brought out not too long ago when he was saying, he was bringing out the point last week, a matter of fact, about how God gave man dominion over the earth. So everything that we see that's going on, when people say, well, why God this and why God that, that's not really the situation. You have to bring it back to perspective that, God gave man this dominion over the earth. You know what I mean? I think that we kind of just, we missed the mark with that. But Elder Judah, can you help me out if I'm wrong? But, speaking to everything what we saying, what's that statement that me and you were talking about that Mr. Lennon had said about the unification when he was like, God cannot do that. And we know that, God can do all things, but he was speaking in reference to as far as mankind unifying and mankind, starting or creating this revolution or going to this higher consciousness or the Christ consciousness. He was basically saying that God has no involvement in that. That's solely up to man. But wasn't that in like the lieu of things, Elder, if I'm not mistaken?
In lieu of what things?
Well, I'm saying, wasn't that what he was saying as far as like what we're talking about, as far as like all the situations that's going on, they need unification. And God has no part in us unifying. That's solely up to us. If we want to fix the problems in the world instead of X and Y, we have to unify. But if we don't unify, that's totally our fault.
Yeah. And just for the clarity, he's making, his context is the reference of God in the context of subjectivism. So God in the context that you and I will be immobile and we're waiting for this this deity to wave a wand or to cast a spell. Because again, he's speaking in the context of the Western concept of God, and not from the scientific deal. Is that our motions in us is how it looks when God does it. So Paul talked about the transformation. When we're doing it, it's a transformation in our consciousness. It's us, but it's the invisible deity transforming our consciousness, and that's how we do it. Opposed to the Western thinking, well, God do it. It's like this entity, like a Zeus, is going to come out of the clouds and make you do something. I just want to make clarity when he's saying that, because people will run with that. But what he's arguing is just simply, we are the tools and instruments. So yes, I will agree. That's what Lenin is arguing. In contrast to Western concepts of how this is to be done, we're immobile. This thing gonna change without us having to do anything. God will come from the clouds and fix it. And Lenin is arguing, no, it's the opposite. Or let me just say this, because it was fascinating to me, because it's actually what Marx teach, is that actually Marx teach that the proletariat is the Messiah. But that's actually biblical doctrine. We just call it the body of Christ. That body of Christ is the proletariat. You know what I mean? So they're really presenting a sound biblical doctrine, in contrast to the deity working outside of us and not using man or anything to make the change. I just want to bring that in, just in case, people, may hear that. Well, they didn't believe in God. No, it's the Western concept they argue. Mm-hmm. This is how God works. Just exactly how Freire and Marx is saying, what you will see in real time are human beings being active. I'll yield.
It's something how we
if I answered your question correctly, if I followed you right.
No, you did, Elder. Thank you. Because what's so crazy about that is that he used Moses, he used Joshua. You see him using human beings, but now today, he just gonna do it all by himself. I mean, that's interesting how it's been lost, and it's been lost by the Western theologians. That they teach you that God, he's gonna do it, and he don't need no help from man. You get the sentiment of, he's God, and he's God all alone, and stuff like that. But when you look at the Old Testament, just basing it upon facts, you see countless of times that he used individuals, to bring about his purpose. He used Nebuchadnezzar. He actually used human beings to reveal himself. And now today, that kind of understanding has been lost. But no, you answered my question. Thank you, Elder. I appreciate
Hey,
it.
but I say to that even to those who are sitting on the sidelines saying that the Most High got to come and do these things, that theory that they're using is really based in hypocrisy. Because, okay, if they want to use that theory, then why are you in these religious settings who have that mind state, why are you doing things such as laying on the hands to heal the sick, casting out demons? How do you do that? You're not, aren't they in agreement that he's using them to do that, but he just can't use them to liberate? We can do all of the metaphysical things in the name of this God. But what we can do is liberate the whole earth in the name of that same God. So it's based in hypocrisy. That's the argument that I see.
That's a good point.
Thank you saying, because then on the other side of that, why do anything? If God gonna do it all, why do anything to the religious people? Why worship? Why sing our songs? God gonna do it all. So why do we do anything? That's begging that you said that, man. No, I follow exactly what you're saying. It's based in hypocrisy. You're right, bro.
Yeah, that was a good point, man. I'd chime in and say that one.
Yep, good point.
Can I add one more thing, Brother Judah?
Yeah, go ahead, my.
So I was just gonna say, I'm going back to kind of what you were talking about, how some people, anyway, you were saying something way earlier about like the Canaanites and how people will say, well, that's their land, and you know, they were there clearly before the Israelites were. But could you argue that if you were going to talk about what humanity is, that the Most High created human beings to be humanity, and what was going on in Canaan, they were not expressing what humanity is, and Israel was called to, I guess, reintroduce humanity to the human race and what that actually looks like. And because the Most High has a purpose for man, and that his mission is to be human and to spread humanity, that because they were not doing that, and then you kind of look at these conditions from a social science perspective and see exactly what they were doing and how what they were doing was dehumanizing to themselves as well as other people, that is why they were exterminated, or not exterminated, but kind of driven off that land.
Yes, that's what you definitely have to make clear. We have to really make that's exactly right. And
Okay.
it has to be made clear what it does it mean to be made human again.
Right.
Because some people don't, they think they are.
Right.
So that's what they told Messiah, right? He said the truth will set you free. They said we ain't been in bondage to no man.
Right.
That's what he told them, you know. So yeah, so yeah, we got that got to be made known. So, but you're absolutely right.
All right. Well, guys, I
Hey,
want to.
speaking of that, oh, I'm sorry. I just want to say something real quick before we shut it down.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's interesting. If you read Josephus, War of the Jews, book 1, I think beginning at chapter 5, and you read like the origin of the Pharisees, and then you start reading about the sect of the Sadducees, it appears, and I could be wrong, but it appears like the Pharisees was an example of objectivists, and the Sadducees was an example of subjectivists, because it was the Sadducees who initially went and, and it was 2 brothers that was pushing this idea that, the rich preys on the poor, and there was that whole campaign against the rich, and a lot of people was being attracted to that because they saw the different plunders that was going on, not only with the Romans but also with Hebrews as well, aristocratic Hebrews. So a lot of people appealed to them because they spoke of certain conditions, and then they taught hope and the afterlife of resurrection and so on and so forth. But they had the Sadducees who they didn't believe in none of that, no resurrection, spirits, angels, they ain't believe in any of that. So their whole thing was live your life the best you can while you're on earth, and that's your portion under the sun. But again, I could be wrong, but it appears, especially when you read Josephus and you see their origins. But I yield on that.
All right. So this is the last paragraph here, and that'll wrap up the reading for tonight. This is the last paragraph on 51. I am skipping a small portion here that's written in Spanish. So I'm going to skip that part and move on. And the paragraph starts and says, making real oppression more oppressive still by adding to it the realization of oppression corresponds to the dialectical relation between the subjective and objective. Only in this interdependence is an authentic praxis possible, without which it is impossible to resolve the oppressor-oppressed contradiction. To achieve this goal, the oppressed must confront reality critically, simultaneously objectifying and acting upon that reality. A mere perception of reality not followed by this critical intervention will not lead to the transformation of object reality, precisely because it is not a true perception. This is the case of a purely subjectivist perception by someone who forsakes object reality and creates a false substitution. And there we can see that just goes on what we just hit on, what we just talked about. And we can see it's 2 perceptions. You have a false perception and a true perception. And we know that the false perception is a denial of the fact, not a denial of the facts, just a reinterpretation of the facts. It's just another attempt to rationalize the oppression. So, and again, that goes back to that submersion of the conscience. The oppressor wants to propagate a state of submersion, they want to submerge the facts. They want to, keep the conscience pressed down. So, to keep the oppressed from liberating themselves. And it's just an attempt to mask a true nature of the oppressive reality. And he goes to this dialectical thought of the world and action are intimately interdependent. So you have to intervene. You can't just have the mere perception. He says you have to follow this up by critical intervention. And he's hitting on praxis a lot here. Is our praxis must be directed toward the critical intervention of those submerged in oppression. And this is the basis for the pedagogy of the oppressed. That's what our praxis is. This is what the praxis is, I should say. And yeah, so he goes on, is those who initially recognize this oppression develop the pedagogy of their liberation, and that's the pedagogy of humankind. So yeah, that's what I take for that last paragraph. Again, it's the floor is open, but that's the last paragraph of the reading for tonight, and the ending of my reading of the pedagogy of the oppressed.
Thank you, my brother. I enjoyed it. I don't know if you want to open up a couple of minutes. People may have a few things to say.
Yeah, the floor is open for anybody that want to add, share their thoughts over the whole thing. Starting from the beginning of chapter 1, page 44 up to 52. It's open for any thoughts. I find it an interesting read. I'm really enjoying it. And I just can't wait to see the mental transformations that we're going to have by the end of this book. Right. And understanding that we'll gain, and the actual taking it from our meetings here and applying it in our life and coming back with that information and sharing it. I think that's going to be great. It's just going to amplify and increase, the learning and the action. So I'm excited, and this is a great book.
You did a great job on your portion of the read, man. I just want to congratulate you on that. You definitely did your homework. You definitely did your homework and looked into this stuff really, and it helped me out. It helped me see some stuff. So, man, I want to thank you for that. And also that this book is really, it's even making me look at myself like even deeper, even more. Like, okay, I'm learning. I'm setting things up. I'm trying to see which way I'm gonna go, but this is definitely giving me some insight on some of the things that I've been considering within myself. And so, yeah, I'm anxious too to keep going and to keep peeling these covers back and just getting this information and putting it in my spirit so it can become one with me. So I can, because I need all of this stuff I've been learning has just been soaked into my spirit, into, which is my thought process, and really changed that. And so this is just another tool that's taking me a little deeper than the things, some of the other books outside of the scriptures. But thanks again for the reading, bro.
All praise, shalom. All praise, bro. That's great, man. And like he says, this we gaining this perception. This is our motivating force, to continue to move us forward. And this is going to create that liberating action. So, yeah, shalom, man. If anybody else want to share anything or You guys ready to wrap it up?
Oh, no, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Akish said. It was a pleasure, bro. You know what I mean? Going over everything, you dialoguing with me, bringing things to my attention. And it's always good, like to submerge yourself in all the literature along with the scriptures. It overall builds, your understanding. That way, when you come outside and you try to engage with people, you have the things that you study and you can use them. It's like your tool chest. You can use them in order to, reason or persuade individuals. So I appreciate how you put time into your presentation, how you showed me things while we was reading over it together, and you did an excellent job, my brother. And shalom to you.
Thank you guys. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, and one more thing, I was talking to Brother Nashawn earlier on the phone, and I was telling them that these things that we're learning, that I believe this stuff. Like, I don't know if y'all understand what I'm saying, but I really believe this stuff, this way of thinking and how to fight. That there is a fight. You just have to learn how to fight it.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're learning, like, I really believe it. Like, I ain't just saying it with your mouth, like, yeah, I believe that. Yeah, I can rock with that. No, I believe this in so much that these books like this are all playing this part to help me with the plan on what I can do, because ain't no going back. Like I said before, ain't no plan B. So whether I fail or whatever, I have to continue with this because this has become a portion of my life that I believe in now. Like I believe in the other stuff that I believed in before. This is another part I believe in. And it's going to take this to do personally, just with me, what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a book like this book right here, and the others, they've all played their parts. And now I'm starting to understand even these scriptures better.
Yeah, it's a powerful book, man. It's definitely in my top 5. I really love the work, man, and I'm appreciative of him as a person to be able to put all this in word form. I cannot imagine, it's a great thing, man, and I'm glad I can be a part of it, and it helped me learn and further my understanding of things. Because, like you say, I believe it too. I believe it with every part of my being that I feel that I'm on the right path. So, yeah.
Well, I pray that the Most High lead and guide us, and I'm gonna take the opportunity, since everybody in the joyful learning spirit, I'm gonna tell everybody again: get yourself a binder. Do it big. Get your sheet protectors, 3-ring binder, and go use that resource, Marxist.org. What we see in this work of Freire, where you think he got it from?
Yeah.
If he's quoting the sentiments of Marx, he have quotations in here from Che Guevara, from Fidel Castro. These men are students of revolutionaries. So when he's saying that the oppressed must confront reality critically, how is he able to confront reality critically? Well, he got to learn about reality. Someone's camera's on. Just check your cameras. I'm not sure exactly who that is, but I see someone I see inside somebody's house. But the reality is being revealed from all of the contributions of humanity to bring about where we are today, all history. That's why he would talk about history changing revolution. I would advise people to get yourself 1920. So Marxist.org, or you get the PDF, but go on Marxist.org, you can find it. Lenin's version, Stalin did it later, but Lenin's version of 1920 saw Joseph Stalin did it in 1925. The task of the Communist Youth League, okay, combat liberalism. That's one of the other articles I referred. I'm referring this article. But when you look at men like and read the writings of Stalin or read the writings of Trotsky or read the writings of Marx and Lenin and Mao, you know what you have? You don't just have authors writing about something else or someone else's actions. You really have recorded journals of revolutionaries and political leaders in action. You see, so they're actually talking about something while it's unfolding. And so therefore you see history in motion. And there you can analyze the reality critically. It's the study of the human organism. Just like you heat up water and it turns into a gas or a vapor, it's just the law of physics, if you will. There's laws to just human interaction. That's why probably Solomon says nothing new under the sun, because we're going to respond in certain ways. So when we look at how these men affected history or their time, see what came from it, this helps us analyze our present realities critically. So take full advantage. If I hope I'm clear on what I'm saying, but to make it plain, take full advantage of it. Go look and read they have articles and journals. Ain't like you got to go read they have some of their books that's about 200-300 pages, but for the most part, there's series of articles and pamphlets just compiled together. And the Most High allow this information to be available to us for free. It's there. Real men, real time, real action. This will help our conversations. This will help our dialogues. It'll be fruitful, even more fruitful, because we're enhancing the learning. So what we see in free air, heck, this is a byproduct of a man who have studied what we need to study, if you understand what I'm saying. I'll yield.
Yeah, you yet again, you are correct. I wasn't even thinking on that page, but I'm definitely gonna have to go back and really open that up, those writings up of Karl Marx and Lenin, because when we did go over that was like the first class I ever attended, like the first series that I ever attended. So yeah, and I got to edit and work with the video, so I was able to look at stuff, but I can't honestly say I opened it up like I know how to open stuff up now. So yeah, I definitely need to go back and start really checking that out. Thanks for bringing that back to the forefront.
You mentioned three ring binders, and don't forget the ink. That's important. Save your quarters and keep up on your ink. Because man, print out that market.org, boy, you'll run out of ink quick. There's so much stuff.
That is true. That is
it
true.
Is. Especially his complete works. So yeah. Hey,
and I would say, and if you're really getting into it, because sometimes it's worth copying it, but then when they have the pamphlets, just like, for example, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, we could print that out, but then they have the pamphlet for sale for $5. I mean, we have this resource where it's free, because sometimes it may be cheaper to get it just offline, just ordering the book. If I mean, seriously, just considering our budgets, that's very important that's a good point you bringing out. Because sometimes, it's cheaper just to print it, but then sometimes, man, you find this booklet already intact in a book $3-4. It's amazing how, I won't say amazing because things have changed tomorrow, but the information isn't that expensive. And again, if people searching and they want the information, dialogue on it. We got to help people get it. Like sometimes the school buy books and stuff like that. And, we get the book to the person, just pay the school back little by little. Heck, $1 a month if you have to. The point is just to get you the information. But yeah, you definitely when you're getting on there, you see some good stuff, just keep it in a balance. Okay, printing cost is this, or you just type it right in on the Amazon or Google it in, and you could probably order that work. But it is important one of the assets is to build a library. That's important because we have to prove all things, make full proof of our ministry. And so it's helpful if God allow us to have a library. Okay, I'll yield with that.
Oh, and don't forget, if y'all didn't hear Elder Judah say, he was talking about Vladimir Lenin, 1920. I've been reading a little bit into it already, and it kind of like shakes you up. Like Lenin comes straight at you, like, yo, man, don't be saying you're a communist and you just saying capitalism is bad and evil. Like it really engages you because he talks about what to learn and how do we learn, and how do we apply or practice what we're learning. I mean, if you go after anything first, I would kind of like suggest that because I think that's where I'm moving towards, and maybe God willing, we can all get together on Clubhouse, Signal, or wherever, and start dialoguing about it. But it's a good read as far as to start to engage and like Elder Drew was talking about earlier, as in regards to like discipleship and going out and evangelizing people. Like what Mr. Lennon is presenting in that book is taking you there. It's going there, but it's also going to kind of like come down your street telling you like, yo, man, all that stuff, you may tattoo the communist symbol on your arm. Like, no, I don't want to hear none of that stuff. Where are your works? Like we see in James talking about our works. So like, it kind of like, he talks about that very heavily in the book and along with some other things. But if you guys are searching for anything, you may want to look that up. The PDF is on Google as well. You can go type it in, Youth Communist League, 1920 Vladimir Lenin, come right up. But yeah, just wanted to put that out there. But I yield as well.
And since you brought that up, I just put everyone's ear. We tried another experiment, midweek experiment. It will be Communism in the Bible. Session 1, session 2, session 3, whatever, how many sessions it will be. But there it will be to introduce news, readings from Marx, Lenin, and all that other stuff what we talking about tonight. So different articles. We want to try to experiment with the Clubhouse to have some type of a political discussion hour or session on Clubhouse. God willing, we're going to try it for Wednesdays. So just to let everybody know if you're interested in that. Wednesdays about 7:30, something around that time. I'll yield.
Hey, brother Brian, whenever you're ready, man, I got some ebook files from Marxist.org for that nice iPhone 13 Max Pro. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on Front Street.
Ain't no Max Pro, man. Stop playing. I only got 2 cameras. 3 cameras.
I'm just messing with you.
I'm poor boy, man. Poor Philly boy, man.
Not for anybody though, because I went to the web. I went on Marxist.org and I don't even know if they have those files anymore. So I was snatching up almost everything that they had. But if you have like an iPhone or an iPad or something like that, and you want to have it to go, you could actually read them as ebooks, which means you could bookmark, you can highlight, you could